Hey, what's going on everybody? It is Undead, back again for the very first episode of my How to Dominate series, where I give you tips, tricks, and general strategies to help you succeed and master all the heroes and villains in Star Wars Battlefront 2. The first episode of this series is going to be entirely dedicated to Kylo Ren, who is one of the newer heroes of the game, and I'm going to focus on things that will improve your performance, survivability, and generally just maximize your potential. Now, there's a lot to cover in this video, so let's just go ahead and jump straight into it. First of all, let's go ahead and get the basics out of the way so we can talk a little bit more specifically later. For those of you watching this video, I'm going to go ahead and assume that you know what his abilities are and what they do. You know, first of all, we have his Force Pull. It pulls enemies closer to him. We have his Frenzy, which he leaps forward and it automatically attacks the closest enemy. And we have his Force Freeze, which he just freezes everybody in his line of sight, essentially. Alright, with that out of the way, Kylo Ren is an incredibly fast and agile hero who focuses on closing the gap with his enemy or forcing his enemies closer to him so he can slash them up close with his lightsaber. His high jump allows him to reach places otherwise not accessible, his sidestepping gives him the ability to dodge blaster fire and get out of combat quickly, and the fact that he can block with his lightsaber gives him the ability to mitigate incoming damage and reflect damage back at his attackers. With all that said, however, Kylo Ren isn't a tank. You can't just push into an objective or a bunch of enemies and take them all on yourself. Compared to Battlefront 1, the heroes in this game are extremely unforgiving, and I really cannot emphasize that enough. One wrong move or one wrong play and you're right back to the spawn screen. You can see this pretty clearly by Kylo Ren's max health of 750. Now, he can regen 250 of that back at any time, but this means you're going to have to play smart if you want to do well as Kylo. So how do you play smart then? Well, the general strategy I follow as Kylo Ren is to pick my battles, hit and run style. Rush in with your team covering you, pull enemies out of their cover or defensive positions, and then freeze them once they're out in the open. This allows your allies to make short work of them, and you may not get all the kills, but you'll certainly be throwing the enemy off balance and helping advance your team. Here's an example of that in action. The single most important and crucial aspect of being a successful player as Kylo Ren is to manage your cooldowns. This is paramount. When you use your abilities and they are cooling down, take cover. Support your team from a strategic position, but never, I repeat, never push into a group of enemies without any sort of cooldowns ready. Groups of 4 or more enemies are not your friend when playing as Kylo or any other melee hero in the game for that matter. My biggest tip is to avoid large groups of enemies at all costs. And the only really exception to that is if you have your team right behind you and you have your cooldowns already, pull them closer, freeze them all, let your team deal with them. You've done your job. Get out of there. Because more than anything, Kylo Ren is a team player, and while he can be very aggressive and be pushing the front lines, he truly shines when sticking with your team. And I know this sounds really cliche, but it's true. Kylo can get even better when sticking with fellow villains, because chaining and comboing abilities with Emperor Palpatine, Darth Vader, or even Darth Maul, or whoever else for that matter, is the quickest way to clinch out a game for your team. If you see an allied villain on your team, become their best friend and stick together. You'll thank me later. Alright, so that's the general strategy out of the way. Now let's go ahead and deep dive into each of Kylo's abilities and go through the do's and don'ts of each. They are all very powerful and each of them have their own unique purpose. First up is his Force Pull ability, which is a fantastic way to get those pesky troopers that keep trying to shoot at you from afar into range of your lightsaber. Now, when approached by groups of 1 or 2, you definitely do want to use Kylo Ren's Force Pull, as it is the death note for regular infantry as they fly helplessly towards you and become easy kills once they hit the ground. You do want to pull enemies out of defensive positions and line them up for easy targets for your teammates, like I mentioned earlier. And one of my personal favorite ways to use this ability is you do want to pull regular troopers or heroes into hazards such as the platforms on Kamino or the pit and the ice caves of Hoth. The last thing you guys need to do when you use Kylo Ren's Force Pull ability is to jump. Don't sit there on the ground waiting for your hand to reach out and pull all the enemies closer to you, because by that time, that animation is going to kill you. If you jump, you negate the animation, you do it in midair, you're constantly moving and flying, you're an extremely hard target to hit, and you'll improve your survivability by tenfold. So please use Force Pull when you're in midair. Now, on the flip side of things, Things you don't want to do. Now, this might come as a surprise, but when facing groups of 4 or more enemies, I would generally recommend that you don't pull that group towards you, because chances are you're only going to be able to kill 1 or 2 of them at most, and the rest will get up and mow you down before you even get a chance to realize what's happening. This obviously can be negated if you're in fact pulling that group of enemies off to their untimely deaths on Camino or something like Hoth. But besides that, you definitely want to avoid pulling large groups of enemies towards you, because 9 times out of 10, you're just going to get wasted. Moving on to Kylo's second ability, which is his Frenzy attack. This one is a bit more straightforward, so it's a small list. But before I get into that though, let me just say this ability feels a little inconsistent. Sometimes Kylo will attack once, sometimes he'll attack twice. But either way, you definitely do want to use Frenzy as a great way to close the gap between you and an enemy, as Kylo will leap forward and reach your target almost instantly. It's pretty crazy. You do want to use Frenzy against 1 or 2 enemies, as it will quickly take care of them. And finally, you do want to use it against enemies that you just pulled or froze. Conversely, you don't want to use Frenzy in midair, as I find it to be really hit or miss. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's really all over the place. And finally, you don't want to use Frenzy against a large group of enemies, such as 4, 5, 6, or even more, unless you're really trying to purposely close the gap. Even then, though, I'd really suggest not getting close to that large group of enemies. Alright, we made it to Kylo's third and final ability, which is also my personal favorite, which is his iconic Force Freeze ability. Now, this ability is just so much fun to use and can really be a lifesaver in pretty much all cases in which case you use it. But if I'm being honest with you, there really isn't any bad time to use Force Freeze. The ability is just that good. But I would say there's a few cases where you should use Force Freeze over other circumstances. For example, you do want to use Force Freeze in conjunction with your Force Pull. You always want to remember that Pull Freeze combo if you want some easy kills or you want to do some massive damage to a hero. You do want Force Freeze if you find yourself in need of an escape route. Remember, just because you Force Freeze them doesn't necessarily mean that you have to kill them. If you need to get away from combat and regen some health, freeze the enemies that are attacking you and just dip out of that situation and go find your safe space. And my final tip for Force Freeze is always make sure to assault objectives by opening up with a freeze. By doing this, you allow your teammates to push in and capture the objective while everyone's frozen and get some easy kills, and overall just let your job be just that much easier. The only thing I would say that you need to make sure that you never do with Force Freeze is something that can be said with Force Pull as well. Just make sure you don't use it against vehicles like the AT-RT or anything like that. It doesn't do anything against them, and it's not going to help you take those out any quicker. Overall, Kylo is an extremely powerful hero whose utility really cannot be overstated. He has sufficient abilities to survive on his own, but where Kylo really shines is pushing and working with his teammates, whether they are troopers or other villains alongside him. He can have considerable trouble when tackling large groups of enemies, and for that reason, I would say you should generally want to focus more on the smaller skirmishes consisting of groups of enemies of 1 to 3 enemies at a time. But the most important thing is don't feel rushed or pressured to deep dive as soon as you spawn in. I know it's exciting, but unless your team really truly needs you to go crazy, take your time. Play methodically and set up devastating combos for your teammates to capitalize on. Follow these tips and you'll be dominating as Kylo Ren in no time. That about wraps up episode 1 of my How to Dominate series in Battlefront 2. I really hope some of you guys found these tips and strategies useful, and I really hope you enjoyed the video. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts and feedback down in the comments below, and if this video helped you out, I would be forever grateful if you shared this video with a friend. Let me know if you want to see more videos like this, and as always guys, I'll see you in the next one. Catch you later.